After that, he spearheaded two important programs in Tata Steel. One was a performance ethic program, which was used for right-sizing the organization and aligned with the market. And this was also in collaboration with iShares Consulting, headed then by Mr. Anil Sachdev, whom all of us or most of us know well. He then spearheaded total quality management movement in Tata Steel. And at that time, Tata Steel got GRD QE award, which is aligned to the Malcolm Baldrige Award of US. He then went on to become the Vice President HRM, Human Resources, and Vice President Raw Materials during these 10 years. And after that, he has been chairman of several subsidiary companies of Tata Steel. So over to you, Sunil, and the format we'll follow is maybe next 45 minutes or so you can speak. And after that, we'll take the question. Is that fine?
Oh, fine.
Right. Over to you, Sunil. We are all ears to listen to you.
Hello, everyone, and good morning once again.
Good morning.
Thank you, Suresh, for your introduction, and also for inviting me to share my thoughts on ethical dilemma in leadership. Leadership role in the corporate world today is quite challenging, as the leaders have to manage expectations of several stakeholders with conflicting interests. The task has become even more difficult with the rise of activist shareholders on one hand and screaming media on the other. While there are many facets of leadership, for today's talk, I would dwell upon primarily the ethical dimension of leadership. Leadership is about one's ability to guide and influence an individual or a group of people. A leader is not necessarily only the CEO, but all those who have a following. He or she could be a manager or even a union representative. The higher up one goes in the organization, the greater are the trappings of power. Power is very intoxicating, and it often clouds one's judgment. As the saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. While decision-making is indeed a necessary function of a leader, dilemma arises when a leader has to choose between two or more alternatives, which are equally undesirable. More so when there is a conflict between mind and conscience. Ethics is a moral code of conduct against which one judges a decision or an action as right or wrong, as fair or unfair. Though ethics is often synonymous with corruption, it is much more than that. It is the moral fabric of any society. However, we have to keep in mind that the moral code is not universal, as it varies from time to time and from society to society. Those of you who are familiar with the earliest known code of conduct, known as the Code of Hammurabi of around 1770 BC, the 10 Commandments, or our own a very unique and elaborate Manu Smriti, will realize that all have dealt with the code of conduct. And one would notice how the code has evolved over the years with changing times. In the earlier days, only persons holding public offices were under the scrutiny. No more. If you pick up any newspaper or tune into any TV channel, you will get the impression that the corruption has become all pervasive and there is a danger that the society would collapse due to multiple organ failure. I recall a cartoon that had appeared after the economic collapse of 2008. The cartoon depicted a man seated on an easy chair reading a newspaper and a child standing in front of him. The child says, "Dad, I have decided to make a career in organized crime." The father, without turning his head, inquires, "Government or the private sector?" This cynical view sums up the state of affairs today. I would request the audience to kindly mute their video because the noise is coming. Audio. Corruption is neither a new disease like the COVID virus that the society didn't know how to tackle it, nor it is a phenomenon typical of less developed countries. I draw consolation from history that sins of all kinds have existed in plenty in all ages and in all societies. There is an anecdote about Diogenes, the Greek philosopher, in the 4th century BC. He was often seen walking in the streets carrying a lantern even in the daytime. And when asked, he would say he was looking for an honest man. Only about a fortnight ago, while observing the death anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, who lived by high ethical standards, I was reminded of an article which I had read in the Reader's Digest many years ago. The title of the article was "The Last Day of Mahatma," and it highlighted things Gandhiji attended to on 30th January 1948 before he was shot dead. Interestingly, that day he had received a letter from a common man complaining that Congress party has become very corrupt and was lamenting कि इससे अच्छे तो अंग्रेज लोग थे. Mind you, we are talking about 1948. Had this Mahatma survived the assassin's bullet, he would have anyway died of heart attack seeing the degeneration of values in public life. But let us examine, were the English really better in public life as perceived by the writer of the letter? Those familiar with the history of the East India Company would not think so. Talking about the East India Company is relevant even today, for there are lessons to be learned from this multinational company, the largest of its kind the world had ever seen. There were indeed some good practices, otherwise the company would not have survived for 270 years. But it seems the core competency of this company was in managing the parliamentarians at home and kings in India through bribery. And when bribery did not work, coercion would. Robert Clive, who started his career as a clerk in this company, when returned to England after retirement, was considered the richest self-made person in Europe. An inquiry committee was set up to investigate into the corruption charges against him. And it is interesting to note what he said in his defense. Kings were ready to open their chests for me to take anything I wanted but to save their forts. I am amazed at my moderation. What a statement. Warren Hastings, his successor, was no saint either. It took British Parliament 2 full days to read out impeachment charges on 24 accounts. Edmund Burke, the parliamentarian, in his opening statement said, "I impeach him in the name of people of India whose land he has desolated, whose laws he has subverted, whose natural justice he has violated." A strong statement against the CEO of any company. You may say that Clive and Hastings were downright corrupt. Where was the question of ethical dilemma? Let me give you another example. When the Sultan of Aceh of Indonesia asked for 2 British maidens for his harem in lieu of granting the trading license, the officers, not to lose business, agreed to the demand and sent the proposal to England. The board even deliberated on this proposal and surprisingly approved it with some minor amendments to clear their conscience. They said they can't send 2 girls as bigamy was unlawful in England. So they recommended sending only 1 girl with the caveat that the Sultan has to marry the girl. And they even selected the girl. Fortunately for her, the King of England did not approve of this. Mind you, this was an act of the company who was popularly known in England as the Honorable Company. The only interest of the company, it seems, was in maximizing profit by any means devoid of any ethical values. The purpose of telling these stories is not to pass an indictment on the East India Company, but to highlight that bribing in one form or the other for seeking favors from the government or the customers have been there for centuries. You may say that the East India Company's history and such behemoths do not exist anymore. Sorry, today's multinationals may not be invading land, but some are invading the minds of people across the world. For example, Facebook, with a following of over 3 billion across the world, a population larger than India and China combined together, is charged with selling data to influence elections in countries and thereby their policies. We from the corporate world often take a holier than thou stand, but are we really so? I am reminded of an Urdu couplet. हर्फ ए हक जो दिल में खटकता है कांटों की तरह, आज इजहार करे और खलिस मिट जाए. The word of truth that throbs in the heart like a thorn, express it today and be relieved of the anguish. I was shocked to read an article published a few years ago in the Economist magazine stating that in USA, 20% of the CEOs faced criminal charges, out of which 11% were serious in nature. Carlos Ghosn, the celebrated chairman of Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi, is now a fugitive. he was prosecuted for corruption, but managed to escape from Japan in a container. He was like a rock star and was even considered as a capable person in a popular poll to govern Japan. Like him, there are many more who are featuring in the Hall of Infame. I am therefore not surprised when I notice how the face of the villain in Indian films has changed over the years. In the 50s, Jamindar would be portrayed as a villain, no more. You will now invariably see a nexus between a corrupt businessman and a politician. Those of you who are familiar with the debate on electoral bonds will know that it is an instrument for the business houses to fund political parties for quid pro quo. The dilemma for the government is how to minimize the usage of cash during election on one hand and maintain anonymity on the other. It has even legalized that, the donation. Another aspect is that the lure of fat bonus has also encouraged managers to subvert norms to achieve their targets. A few years ago, Volkswagen, the automaker, the world's second largest automaker, was accused of tampering with emission norms. Another major car company, Mitsubishi, was charged for falsifying fuel economy. Officers in Wells Fargo Bank, the world's maybe the third largest bank, were charged for creating thousands of fictitious customer accounts. Another large bank, HSBC, was charged for facilitating the laundering of black money. There are many such violations. It is not always that professionals subvert norms for personal gains only, but at times they do so under the misplaced belief that their action would benefit their company. This is called the dilemma of loyalty. Loyalty is considered a virtue, but what happens when you go overboard? Let me share with you two cases on the breach of professional ethics and leave it to you as jury to decide guilty or not guilty. The Ford Motor Company had introduced a popular model in 70s called Pinto. The car had a weak fuel tank. When accidents happened, the tank would burst into flames. Several persons were killed. One owner took the company to court. During inquiry, it was revealed that the designer had used a thin steel seat to save just $11 on cost. The company was aware of the weakness and had even calculated how many deaths would happen in case of accidents and how much of compensation they would have to pay. And then, surprisingly, they did the cost-benefit analysis and found that even after giving compensation to the deceased, it was profitable to continue with the weak tank. How comfortable would you feel when you are told that the company is trading your life for profit? Let me give you another example from Philip Morris Company, the manufacturer of the famous Marlboro brand of cigarettes. It is a very profitable company and had featured in the Jim Collins famous book, From Good to Great. Czech Republic, where smoking was very hot, wanted to ban smoking because of its ill health, its effect on health and life. Like our own Chief Minister Nitish Kumar, who banned the consumption of alcohol in Bihar. Alarmed at the loss of sales, the executives of Philip Morris urged the government not to do so. The bizarre logic that was put forward was the government will not only lose revenue, but will also have to spend more on retirement benefits as the people will now live longer. Do you see the ethical fallacy in this logic? Even the enlightened boards have not been above board and have covered up issues of corruption. You are aware how the boards of ICCI and also of Infosys had hushed up ethical issues when raised by whistleblowers some time back. Let me give you another example. When Steve Jobs was diagnosed with cancer, the Apple board was faced with an ethical dilemma, whether to keep quiet or share this news and face the consequent impact on Apple's share price. Steve Jobs was no ordinary CEO. He was the chief architect and synonymous with Apple. In their judgment, the board decided to keep quiet. And when the news broke out, the investors accused the board of hiding this information from them. It was a vital information. When small businesses are accused of corruption, they don't make headlines. But hell breaks loose when venerable institutions fall from the pedestal. As Shakespeare put it beautifully in the play The Julius Caesar, when beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. We must realize that reputed companies do have a brand value which is severely damaged when unethical practices are reported. As I worked all along in Tata Steel, let me share with you some interesting anecdotes. Not that Tata Steel has been immune to corruption, but when reported, swift actions have been taken against erring individuals. The institution, by and large, is perceived by the society as fair, honest, and trustworthy. When I was in charge of the coal mine, my colleague once narrated an incident. A dumper was involved in an accident and was seized by the Thana. So he, along with other colleagues, approached the local Thana for the release of the dumper. When they were arguing with the sub-inspector, the Thana in charge walked in. He heard the conversation and inquired in Hindi, "Aap log kahan se aaye hain?" And when told that they were from Tisco Colliery, the Thana in charge chided his subordinate, saying, "ये लोग चीफ मिनिस्टर तक चला जाएगा, मगर तुमको एक पैसा नहीं देगा। अपना समय फालतू का बर्बाद मत करो और डंपर छोड़ दो." And he ordered the release of the dumper. Let me share another instance to emphasize the importance of a trusted brand. Once I had a meeting with the chairman, Steel Authority of India, with a proposal to form a joint venture with Tata Steel so that we could bid together for coal mines which the government intended to auction. He remarked, टाटा स्टील के साथ ज्वाइंट वेंचर करने में हमको कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। किसी दूसरे के साथ करेंगे तो पार्लियामेंट में 10 सवाल उठेगा। Subsequently, we formed a joint venture. The privatization of Air India and giving it to the Tatas without any hue and cry, either from the employees or from the leaders is a case in point. In order to preserve the ethical character of any organization, my advice to managers and leaders is to apply 3 filters before you act. First, ask yourself, is my act lawful? If the answer is no, don't subvert or circumvent, even if the law is archaic and needs changing. Giving or receiving bribe or any other favor is illegal. If it is lawful, then the second filter is to consider whether it is in accordance with the moral values of society. For example, extramarital affairs among consenting adults, not uncommon in organizations, is not against law, but frowned upon by society. Moral turpitude is also considered an act of misconduct. I have seen managers and leaders losing out because of this. Lastly, listen to your conscience and debate whether your action is just and beneficial to the society at large. Let me share with you a case. OxyContin is a painkiller drug often prescribed by doctors in US. The drug mimics the effect of opium, hence categorized as opioids. The opioid drugs are addictive and have reportedly caused the death of about 500,000 people in US in the last 2 decades. 3 years ago, the McKinsey and Company, the famous consulting firm, agreed to pay the US government $600 million to settle an investigation in its role in helping Purdue Pharma to boost its sale of opioid drugs. And so have the other companies been fined. These companies, as well as doctors, were well aware of the side effects, yet they promoted the drug. You may have heard of the opium war between England and China. Ironically now, the role has reversed. There is a diplomatic row between China and America over a synthetic drug named fentanyl, exported to USA by China. This opioid is 50 times more potent than opium and is very popular as performance enhancer drug amongst the youngsters, including engineers in the Silicon Valley. I wonder, in order to boost sales, what would happen if popular drinks like Coca-Cola are made addictive? Where do you draw the line? Leadership positions are lonely. You may take as many advices as you need, but the decision is ultimately yours, and you have to own the consequences. Unethical decisions in particular will weigh heavy on your conscience. As leaders, you will also face dilemma in taking decisions on issues which are not necessarily unethical in nature, but affect the lives of people. You get torn between heart and mind. Let me share with you an experience when I was spearheading the performance ethic program, PEP in short, in Tata Steel in the year 2000 with the help of McKinsey and Company. So far, we have been talking about ethics in the context of morality, but this program emphasized on work ethic, the standard of performance expected from officers. It was first of its kind in India for its sheer scale. the program aimed at overhauling the HR strategy underpinning the growth strategy of the company. It started with redesigning the entire company to move away from functional organization to customer-aligned organization, followed by delayering, removing unnecessary layers from 13 levels to 5 levels, and in this process, downsize the officer's strength by 20%. Tata Steel has a long history of industrial harmony and is known for its people-oriented practice, where lifetime employment has been the norm. The launching of this program sent a shock wave throughout the organization and became the talk of the town. Initially, I was reluctant to take up this assignment, but Dr. Jamshed Irani, the then managing director, called me to his room and conveyed a very straightforward message that I had to head this program. I recall his words: "This job will make you unpopular, but this job has to be done." I wondered what kind of a leader he was for driving such an unpopular program in his last year before retirement, more so when the company had made a record profit. He could have retired with laurels and leave this dirty job for his successor. But he had the kind of stuff in him that leaders are made of. He said that his shoulders were broad enough to bear the criticism, and his conscience would not allow him to leave behind this problem for his successor. He made a difficult choice whether to make the company leaner and fitter or save the jobs. It was my most emotionally disturbing assignment. I recall an incident when an officer, after undergoing the assessment program, returned home, died of heart attack in the night time, and the wife gave a statement in the local newspaper that he died due to the stress caused by this program. I too was struggling with the ethical dilemma whether I help my friends and relatives who had expectations from me, or I follow the process with professional indifference, irrespective of the outcome. However, in one case, I listened to my heart. I came to know about an officer who was to be outplaced, had gone out of town to attend to his son, who had met with an accident and was in critical condition. I sent a note to Dr. Irani stating the situation and requesting him that he be taken out of the list at this point. I felt happy when he agreed with my recommendation. I got one lesson that leaders must show compassion when needed. While I had heard the context of Gita so many times, it was during that 2-year traumatic period that I could appreciate its relevance. How troubled Arjun would have been facing his relatives in the battlefield. Facing dilemma is common in life. In Mahabharata, many characters faced ethical dilemma. For example, Bhishma, whose heart was with the Pandavas, but was fighting for the Kauravas. Karna's loyalty was torn between his friend Duryodhan and his Pandav brothers. Gita is indeed a unique discourse on how to take the right decisions when faced with ethical dilemma. By the way, the English word right is derived from the Sanskrit word ritam, which according to core Hindu philosophy means there is a cosmic law that governs the universe, and the individuals must conduct themselves according to this common law. The Hindi word riti, meaning customs or tradition, is also derived from that. The famous lines of Ramayana, Raghukul riti sada chali ai, pran jai par vachan na jai, expresses the ethical dilemma of King Dasrath. For the benefit of HR professionals who draft corporate policies, I would recommend them to keep in mind two other terms often used in our culture, niti or nyay. Simply stated, niti is policy, where nyay is justice. Justice tests the rightness of any policy. When riti or tradition becomes out of tune with time, there is a need to modify it with niti, a stated policy, which is enforceable. However, if the policy is not seen as fair, there will be a lot of resentment, and the matter might be taken to court, which can set aside the policy. Remember that nyay or justice is about fairness. Hence, any policy seen as unfair must be changed to deliver justice. Let me give you an example. Walmart, the largest retail store in the world, had a corporate insurance policy for its employees, termed as death peasant insurance. When an employee died, his widow, knowing that her husband was insured, asked for the insurance money, but it was denied to her. The company explained that the beneficiary was not the family, but the company, as the company had spent money on training the employee and therefore it needed compensation from the insurance. She took the matter to the court, which forced Walmart to settle the lawsuit in favor of the widow. Justice is not always in black and white. For when you save the lamb from the wolf, it is fair for the lamb, but unfair for the wolf. Let me illustrate this with a famous court case of 1959. Naval Commander Nanavati was put on trial for the murder of Prem Ahuja, his wife's lover. Those of you who are in the 70s might be familiar with sensational case, but others can watch two Hindi films that have been made on this story. Ye Raaste Hain Pyar Ke in the 60s and Rustam made recently. The case in brief is when Nanavati came to know that his wife Sylvia was in love with his friend Prem Ahuja, he obtained a service revolver from Navy, went to Ahuja's flat, confronted him, fired 3 bullets, killing him, then surrendered in the police station, confessing the act. Ahuja's sister, who was also present in the flat, was the eyewitness. It was an open and shut case. Yet, when the case was tried out, surprisingly, 8 of the 9 juries gave the verdict as not guilty. The jury's perception of justice was different from the provisions of law. The judge was in a dilemma whether to exonerate Nanavati based on jury's verdict, as he was bound by the procedure, or deliver justice. He could not resolve his dilemma and referred the case to the higher court, who ordered a retrial without jury, wherein Nanavati was found guilty. Since perception can undermine justice, the jury system was abolished in India since then. Let us turn our attention to business and what needs to be done to prevent unethical practices. Merely having policies such as policies on taking gifts or on sexual harassment or forming an audit committee in the board may not be enough. My experience says that organizations do not suffer so much from the misconduct of individuals, but more because of the gradual erosion of institutional values. When an individual does something wrong, a strong institution can correct his action. But what happens when the institution itself becomes sick? Who corrects the institution? This happens when people in the organization become indifferent, when people stop bothering about things that they see around and even stop others from raising alarm. It is bad for the organization. हक अच्छा, हक के लिए कोई और मरे तो और अच्छा. तुम क्या सरमद हो जो सूली पे चढ़ो? खामोश रहो. Truth is good. If somebody else dies for the truth, even better. Are you a martyr to climb the gallows? Hold your tongue. It would be a sad day for organization when people stop raising their voices. The organizations do not suffer so much from the misdeeds of the minority, but more from the silence of the majority. Considering the vagaries of the human nature, the only defense is to formulate transparent policies on one hand and build democratic institutions on the other, where people can raise concerns and which are acted upon promptly. Concentration of power invariably leads to corruption. Organizations must have checks and balances in the system. With a large number of women now joining the workforce, organizations have to be gender sensitive, and we can't hide behind old traditions. When officers are found guilty, I have seen they usually quit silently so that they don't have a problem in finding the next job. But when it comes to workers, it is a different matter. With minimal chances of getting another employment, loss of job affects livelihood. I narrate one case of an employee discharged on account of sexual harassment. He would stand at my gate every morning for over a month for his reinstatement. I brought this to the notice of the president of the workers' union because he would always take up cases of dismissal. And when I asked him why he had not taken up this case, he said, हमको लगा कि इसका केस लेंगे तो वो लड़की यदि हमसे पूछेगी कि आपके बेटी के साथ ऐसा होता तो आप क्या करते? He was faced with this ethical dilemma and therefore decided not to take up this case. Leaders must walk the talk and reinforce this with right actions. To quote a line from Gita, Yad yad acharati shreshtas tat tad eve taro jana. The way the seniors conduct themselves, common men follow them. As leaders, our responsibility does not end by being honest and consensuous. We must also create just institutions manned by competent persons who are seen as fair and who promptly deliver justice. Since it is not pragmatic for any society or organization to make rules for everything, leaders, therefore, must work towards building ethical culture in the organization so that right values get embedded in the employees early on. Remember that people are more afraid of the wrath of God than the long arms of law. I will close my talk with a philosophical couplet from Isho Upanishad. With an underlying belief in the immortality of soul as well as in karma, the message tells us to reflect on our actions even after death. Vayur nilam mritam thedam vasmantam sariram om krato esmar krito esmar krato esmar krito esmar. After death, when breath goes to the air and body is consigned to ashes, O consciousness, remember thy deeds, remember thy deeds. O consciousness, remember thy deeds, remember thy deeds. History will treat us favorably or unfavorably, not based on what we said or meant, but what we did, upholding the moral values. It is ultimately the action that prevails. Hence, before acting, keep in mind what kind of legacy we would like to leave behind for the younger generation. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful lecture, Sunil. Thank you so much. And I think 35 of us were listening in rapt attention. Before I open up the session for question answer, I will like to ask you one question. President Trump in his time did not follow the climate change principles and what was agreed in several conference of parties. He harmed the whole world and he probably is set to come up again. What do you think is the ethics in this? It is his understanding that climate change doesn't affect the world, but it does. For everyone, it does. What would you say?
In a democracy, I have noticed people cater more to their voting constituency. It is gaining power that matters, not the other issues. It is very interesting when I was reading the philosophy of Plato, the Republic. He says democracy is not the right form of government because of its populist nature. He says, when the ship is facing the storm, you don't handle the rudder to the most popular person, but the person who is competent. And this is the problem with democracy, that often people do what suits them to come to power. So Trump has been talking to those group of people. He's still very popular. By the way, the current rating says he's popular than Biden because his voters want him to come back to power. They are more concerned about employment and others, not about the climate issues.
Okay, thank you. So we have first hand going up, Mr. Srinivasan. Srini, please go ahead. And another.
Thank you very much, sir. And in fact, I've just put it on the chat as well. Your session was indeed like Gita Updesh. And I'm sure every time we hear your recording, we will find new meanings and new perspectives on this whole topic of ethical dilemma. My question is somewhat related to the earlier question. This whole aspect of nature and natural capital. We have never taken into account the cost of natural capital in any one of our decisions. However, we all know the impact and the adverse effects it's going to have in the following generations. So as leaders, one of the topmost ethical dilemma in corporate world is the use of natural resources and ensuring we leave it in a better condition than what we received it. What's your view about it, and how do you think leaders can navigate this in our own business journeys?
I agree with you totally. There is hardly anything to disagree with you, but the is a bit complex. I've been reading about it, how there is a divide between North and South. The developed countries want the developing countries to ban or minimize the uses of fossil fuels. But the developing countries, on the other hand, say that you have already polluted the atmosphere, already in the last 200 years plus of the Industrial Revolution. And now, when it is our turn to grow, you are putting a ban.
Sir, as a CEO of a company and as a leader within the company, how can we handle this ethical dilemma?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I can tell you about in industry. There are three major industries which are considered very pollutant: the power industry, the cement industry, and the steel industry. The power industry, though in Indian context, again the target has been set for higher production of coal because India would be needing greater power in the coming days, but at the same time finding alternatives. So that is happening. Solar power or the nuclear power, steel plant for that matter, is now trying to reduce the carbon footprint through technology by injecting hydrogen. The auto industry also has gradually switching over to electric vehicles. But there is also a concern that the excess use of electric vehicles and the minerals that are used, like lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, the mining of these will further add to the pollution. So, technological intervention will help in minimizing, if not controlling, the further emission of, say, greenhouse gases.
Thank you.
I would like to comment here that when this dialogue is going on between developed and developing nations about the emission of greenhouse gases, in 70s, when the price of crude oil started going up after the Gulf War, strategically, these nations, the developed nations, very silently pushed the developing world to start using coal and conserve oil and reduce prices. Today, when the greenhouse gases have become absolutely high emission, now they are trying to reverse the role. And this is, in my view, very unethical at that point of time. They should have taken the burden of the increase in the oil prices. Anyway, next, Mr. Pradeep Sen. After that, Mr. Shekhar.
Yeah, I think a brilliant talk, and I related to a lot of things. First thing, Mr. Mishra, I have happened to know Dr. Irani through my association engagement from IBM and SAP, and seen him as one of the finest leaders, person who spoke very simple but very powerful comment. I remember he's told me once that when Lalu Yadav comes to meet him, he comes to ask for what is not his. And he says, when I go to him, I go to ask for what is mine. So there lies the basic, this thing. One of the comments I wanted to make is that, while we say that I have seen in India with the multinationals and things, if anybody speaks out, as you said, one should, 90% of the people are on the other side. That is my clear observation. Okay. And the MNCs don't like to get involved in all this. So actually, by doing speak ups and raising issues that look not ethical, you basically invite a lot of trouble. At least that's my experience in India. So, what would your view be? I feel that if the top man is very strict and is ruthlessly clean and insist on that kind of behavior, then possibly the rest of the organization follows a certain ethical standards, which anyway is going down over time. Any comments on that?
I agree with you. The top man has to be of high ethical principled executive, but not only him. The entire leadership team should exhibit that, and that is how it will percolate downwards. Only one person being is not enough, as you have seen in the case of our previous prime minister. The entire team has to.
Correct.
And it is therefore, as I said, the necessity of creating a democratic institution for raising concerns.
Mr. Shekhar?
Thank you very much, sir, for the great insights. You mentioned about this organizational value should not get eroded. My question is, what do you recommend to ensure an individual value is aligned to the organizational value, and more importantly, how will we make the individuals to demonstrate and live the organizational values? What kind of practices or advice you can recommend?
It also depends upon what kind of behavior you reward and what kind of behaviors you punish. If the organization rewards good behavior, then you will see good behavior percolating across the organization. As I said, I often notice when there is too much emphasis on performance at any cost, then you have issues like this. And I have noticed, surprisingly, the high performance in the organization often flout the norms under the belief that the company will not take actions against them because they are high performers. And in order to stay forward or march ahead in the organization, anything is justified. So we have to be careful there, whether the end justifies means or the means justify the end. So through actions only, the organization can convey this message.
Mukul?
Yes, Suresh, thank you. Yes, sir, an excellent lecture. I think much that our country and every individual needs today. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, the companies are mostly driven by the profit motive, and even the politicians are mostly running after power. So whatever it may be, it is generally promoting a sense of ethical quotient is going down in the society also. I speak to a lot of youngsters and people who are still building their careers. Somehow the belief is that more ethical we are, it's very difficult to move along, get what we want in this era of instant gratification. Everybody wants everything as of yesterday. And also, since the whole society runs like this, then if I don't do something, even if it may be unethical, then it's okay. That's how people justify it to themselves. So, of course, all this is very disturbing, and your thoughts have been excellent in putting more light. But one thing that still bothers me, and I thought I'll just ask you this: how do you think we can probably create a better world for the future? In terms of maybe especially the younger people, how to influence them and make them realize that the value of ethics is so important in one's life in the long run, and not look at only in the short run. Thank you.
My personal observation that normally we blame the leaders for their unethical behavior, but actually leaders are the reflection of the character of the society. And as the saying goes, each nation deserves the leader that gets the leader that it deserves. Ethical values would not necessarily be infused when an employee joins the company, when he is an adult. It has to be imbibed in the family itself. What kind of characters we build in our children at the earliest stage of life, when ideas are getting formed, it stays with them much more than expecting them to transform after they have entered the organization. It is a sad affair, but then my only hope is that cometh the hour, cometh the leader, and time to time the society gets a leader like Gandhi. But it happens.
Thank you.
Apparently, there are no more questions. Is anybody else willing to ask a question now? Okay. Thanks, Sunil. It was a wonderful session, and I think your explanation was so great and in depth that our fellow coaches are silent. Over to Manik for concluding the session.
I thought that our, the coach communities shall bombard a lot of questions, but it is surprising that the questions are not flowing in, because the talk probably was very much self-explanatory from every angle. Thank you very much, Mr. Misra, for delivering this fantastic lecture, and it has given us a lot of ways to think about this all important issue fundamentally in our personal lives. I thank all the members, the coach community, and the guests who have taken time to attend this and enriched this program very well. Before I say that, I see two hands raised again, Mr. Pradeep Sen and Shiva. So should we go back to Pradeep and then for the second question?
Yeah,
Mr.
a quick one, because
Yeah.
what I wanted to say is this whole thing about ethics on environment is a bit of a dicey this thing. I happen to know a company, startup company that does travel to religious places by electric buses and things. Net emission or pollution at the charging stations is substantially more than the normally high efficient diesel buses. How do you look at ethics in such a situation?
As I said earlier also, there has been a lot of debate whether the electric vehicle will reduce pollution. Or some feel that the pollution is now getting shifted from the vehicles to the power generation on one hand, and the mining of those scarce minerals on the other. But I hope with the advancement in technology, some solution will come. One thing good about the scientific approach is when you ask a pertinent question, it tries to find an answer. And as I said, if we are living in a democratic society, sooner or later, we will find better and better solutions. And as you have noticed, India also has moved into many non-fossil supported power generation. But on one hand, as I said, the demand is increasing. But there are solutions, and hopefully in the coming years, people would find the solution. To give you an example, after the Fukushima tsunami, and when the nuclear power plant was affected, Europe took the decision that they will not build nuclear power plant any further. But soon after the Ukraine crisis, when the natural gas supply was affected, now they have gone back to recommissioning of those nuclear power plants. So that itself will reduce to a great extent the pollution norms. Coming specific to the auto industry, I would say it is a work in progress.
Thank you.
Shiva, please.
Shiva.
Yeah, just heard Manikda talk about the apparent lack of questions. Actually, I can say for myself and perhaps for many others on this call, I mean, there's so much to mull over what Mishraji spoke about. There is a sense of, I won't say getting overwhelmed, but being so deeply impacted that the gears in the mind are kind of just whirring away. And, lack of apparent questions perhaps, really bears no correlation. I mean, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to use the opportunity of some time available to express my deep gratitude to you, Manikda, and Suresh Bhai, and of course, Dr. Mishra for this really wonderful session. And as I was listening to the sessions, it occurred to me that oftentimes the dilemma is not between right and wrong, which perhaps is really easy, but it is between two rights. And how does then one proceed when one has to choose between two rights? And I was wondering if Mishraji would, have any gems to share on that score. Thank you, sir.
I like reading philosophy because it raises some soul-searching questions. And there has been a long debate about two schools of thought or philosophy known as deontology versus consequentialism. Deontology talks about doing your duty irrespective of the consequences, what the Gita teaches. But the consequentialism talks about no, bother more for the consequences and therefore choose the means. The Gandhi would support that. But there's another philosopher who has brought some sanity into that is Immanuel Kant. He's a famous book, The Critique of Reason. And there he talks about another element must be added. And that element talks about the intention, not only about the means or the consequence, but also the intention with which you do the job. You may get the desired result, you may not get the desired result. But if the intention is right, one should pursue that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Any other latent questions if the audience would like to ask? Thank you so much, Mr. Mishra. Thank you once again. It was a very deep conversation. I think everybody has gained a lot of insights on these issues. Generally, I think when the values, beliefs, etc. come, we generally tend to take a superficial view, but it has gone really deep into the topic. Thank you so much. Thanks all the participants. Thanks all the participants. Thank you, Minu, specifically for making this technological arrangement for this wonderful session. It has been free from any interruption. Thanks, Suresh, for your steering this particular program.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
We
everyone.
look forward to hear Mr. Mishra on many other topics. When I spoke to him before, I got an open invitation from him to talk to him on any topic not of his interest, of my interest. So I now take it of our own interest. So we shall try to disturb him again and again and look forward to his kind lectures on this, insightful lectures. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Manik, and all the audience for your patient listening. I will only end up with another thought, because somebody said the dilemma between right and right. I was reminded of a dilemma stated by the philosopher Plato. He said that a mother had 3 children. The oldest one has made a flute, but he doesn't know how to play it. The middle son has not made the flute, but knows how to play it. And the youngest son doesn't have a toy, and he wants the flute as a toy. So he poses the question, what should the mother do? If she divides the flute into 3 parts, it is useless. So depending upon your own culture and your philosophical thought, you will take a decision, and therefore culture and ideology plays a very important role in taking the ethical decision. Thank you all once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.